Hey there, my name is Ross Reddick. I'm a minister in the Presbyterian Church USA. I'm certainly glad you've chosen to be with us for today's video lesson. Today we're going to talk about Maundy Thursday, which is always the Thursday right before Easter happens. Every now and then as a pastor I get a pop quiz. It doesn't happen very often, but sometimes it does. It usually happens around a table with a group of friends, and someone will just turn to me quickly and say, "Hey, you're a pastor, answer this random question that I have for you." Sometimes I know the answer and sometimes I don't. One of these situations happened to me just the other day in church. I walked in on a group of congregants who were just passing the time, and as I was walking by, one of them asked, "What does Maundy Thursday mean?" Now, I had been working on the Maundy Thursday service, of course, and so all of this stuff was swimming around in my brain. And so I briefly explained to them what Maundy Thursday was about. I said, it's about a bunch of things, really. It's about remembering the night that Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. It's a night we usually celebrate the Lord's Supper together. It's also the same night that Jesus gave a new commandment to his disciples, which was to love one another, just as he had loved them. Now, by this time, everyone sort of understood what it all meant, but I hadn't answered the question. So what does it mean? What does Maundy, the word, mean itself? I'll give you a little hint. It's about this new commandment that Jesus gave to his disciples. The early Christians took the words of Jesus very seriously and very literally in some cases. When he said, "Do as I have done," they really did. They went out and did the things that he asked them to do. He had washed their feet, for example, so one of the very first Christian liturgies that we are aware of is the washing of one another's feet in the midst of a worship service. Over the centuries, people, of course, began to add different pieces and parts to this basic liturgy, and the words that Jesus spoke in that Bible story were actually made into a song in the Latin language. And so the word in Latin for commandment is mandatum, from where we get the word mandate, for example. And so over time, people began to refer to this liturgy as the Maundy Thursday liturgy, after this mandate that Jesus had given his disciples to love one another. Now, if we take just a minute and think about the story, it's pretty easy to imagine that the disciples were perhaps shocked and amazed when Jesus took up this basin of water and this towel and began to wash their feet. This was a strange thing for him to do, right? He was their master. He was their Lord. This is not something that people of high stature do, of course. Imagine if you saw the President of the United States buffing someone's shoes on a street corner. Or imagine you saw the Queen of England giving someone a pedicure. This would be the sort of situation of Jesus washing someone's feet. It would have just been very strange to the disciples as they watched on. Now, in these days, in Jesus' time, foot washing was a pretty typical thing, but it was done by the servants of someone's household. It wasn't exactly a glamorous job, as you might imagine. People's feet got really dry and dusty from walking around in sandals all day. And so to wash someone's feet was an act of hospitality, it was an act of humility, and it was an act of care for one another. And so it's no wonder really that Simon Peter told Jesus, "You will never wash my feet." This was something that he couldn't imagine Jesus doing for him. After all, Jesus was the master and the disciples. Peter, he was the servant. But yet, there Jesus was in the story, and he did that exact thing. And when he got done, he told them why. He said, "I'm setting an example for you." He said, "You should also do what I have done to you." And I sort of wonder in my heart if that might be the moment in time where the disciples finally start to get what all of this had been about. They had been hand-selected by Jesus from these crowds. They had been taken from their sort of blue-collar jobs, and he had called them and he gave new meaning to their life. He set them out on this adventure that no one really knew how it was going to end. Jesus called them to serve, to carry on his ministry that he began of loving people as much and as deeply as he could. And you can almost hear the disciples saying, what are we going to do about all this? What are we going to do? This reminds me of a story that so many new parents have shared with one another. They often recount the birth of their first child, and everything is all fine and good while they're in the hospital and the nurses and doctors are around helping take care of the newborn baby. But then at some point it's time to go home, of course, and so the new parents will head down to the car and get everything ready and begin to pull off, and they'll arrive home with their new child, and reality sort of hits them in the face. And many of them, of course, say something like, what in the world are we going to do now? There are no doctors and nurses on hand to do this work. There's no instruction manual. What do we do now? And it's in that moment for parents that I think the answer is very simple. And it's also the answer that I imagine God giving to those disciples, which is simply, just love them. We need to remember that Jesus is preparing his disciples for a time when he will no longer be with them in a physical sort of way, and they'll be the ones to carry on his ministry, to do the work that he began in this earth. And so they will be the ones standing in front of the crowds of people, staring right into the faces of sinners of all shapes and sizes, all suffering from their own brokenness and longing to be a whole people once again. But amidst all that work, I would imagine that one of the images that would stick out in their minds would be Jesus washing their feet. It's an image of simplicity. See, it's just this simple. Love them. I'm sending you into the world, into the crowds of people from whom I called you, remember. Your job is simply to love and to serve. And so the question for us today, we modern day disciples, Christians, is what does it look like to love people? Yes, we can literally follow the exact commandment of Jesus to wash each other's feet. And many churches do participate in this liturgy frequently, as a matter of fact, remembering this time in the biblical narrative. But I'd much rather talk about real ways that we might show love and hospitality in our modern times that make sense for our own context. Now, I imagine if you have a guest over to your house, it's no longer the case that you ask people to take off their shoes so that you can wash their feet for them. To be honest, that would be a little bit weird. So I've tried to think of some things that are analogous to this expression in our times, but I really don't think there is one. But at its heart, it's about being willing to serve those whom you come across in your day-to-day life. And so my question for you and for all of us is, are we willing to serve God in creative and in new and in humble ways? Are we willing to be the ones to kneel down, to get our hands dirty as we attend to the needs of others? Or do we simply want to show up and have our feet washed? Are we going to be a people who care about one another, who visit each other, who call each other, who send wonderful text messages to one another? Or are we just going to be ones who consume? Or does our discipleship stop when we leave the doors of our churches after Sunday worship? Friends, love is a command. It's a command. Serve is a command. And just like those disciples, we might not know exactly what to do next or where this path is taking us. But we do know that God is there with us, walking with us along that journey. And so in conclusion, if you remember one thing, perhaps it's that you've learned what Maundy means. It comes from the Latin word that means mandate, this new command that Jesus gave us to love one another. And it's our job in these days to figure out wonderful ways to do that very thing. And I trust that the Lord will bless you on your journey as well. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.